Hi, I'm Venna. They called me a threat for holding a cup of coffee. They tased me, zip-tied me on the ground while neighbors whispered, filming me like I was a criminal. But the real betrayal? It wasn't the SWAT's mistake. It was the sister I trusted who sold our mother's house behind my back while I worked double shifts to pay for her medication. Have you ever woken up one day and realized your own family set you up? Stay with me. You're about to see how I took it all back. I had just enough time to notice the way the morning light hit the cracked pavement outside Pete's Market before the wind caught the receipt in my hand, sending it twisting around my wrist like a paper snake. I held on to it without thinking, the coffee in my other hand still steaming, leaving a faint trail of warmth through the sleeve of my old gray sweatshirt. It was quiet on the block, the kind of quiet that almost made me forget I had barely slept, trying to balance Mom's medication bills while clocking hours for a client who couldn't pay on time. Mom's voice was still in my head from last night, small and tired. "Thank you for getting the coffee, baby." She didn't know I had seen the email, the one from Milas. "Mom signed over the house to me," Milas wrote with that little smiley face at the end like it was a joke between sisters. But it wasn't a joke. It was the house Mom and I kept warm when the heating broke, and Milas was too busy to pick up her phone. The house I worked double shifts to keep, paying the taxes when Mom couldn't. I lifted the coffee to my lips, but my hand shook, the lid rattling as the steam hit my face. I wasn't sure if it was the cold or the anger, maybe both. The low rumble of tires on gravel pulled my eyes to the corner where a dark SUV turned too fast into the lot, crunching over loose stones. I watched it park crooked, the engine still humming, doors swinging open. Black boots stepped out first, heavy, scuffing the edge of the sidewalk, then another pair and another. The air changed, thickening as the doors slammed shut behind them. "Hands where we can see them!" someone shouted. I froze, the coffee nearly slipping from my fingers. I blinked, trying to understand if they were talking to me, but there was no one else there, just me, the coffee, the receipt now trembling in the breeze. The first officer's eyes met mine, and he flinched like he didn't expect me to look back. "I said hands up now," he barked, voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. My left hand went up slowly, but I couldn't bring myself to drop the coffee. It felt like the last thing I had that was warm, the last thing that belonged to me. The wind caught a strand of my hair, blowing it across my face as I tried to speak. "I'm just getting coffee for my mother," I said, but it came out softer than I intended. "Drop it," another voice snapped, closer this time. I saw the neighbors now, peeking from behind blinds, the woman across the street pulling her robe tighter around herself as she watched, phone in her hand, recording. Another man stood on his porch, arms folded, shaking his head like he had seen this all before. I looked back at the officers, at the black vests with shining badges, the way their hands hovered over their belts, fingers twitching. My chest tightened, heat crawling up my neck as I realized I couldn't move. I should have dropped the coffee, but I didn't. "Ma'am, last warning." Something in me wanted to scream. At them, at Milas, at Mom, at the world for making me stand here alone, shaking, while strangers decided if I was a threat because I didn't move fast enough, because I was tired, because I was holding on to the only warmth I had left that morning. "Don't," I managed to whisper, but I saw the way his eyes narrowed, the way his thumb slipped under the safety cap of the taser, and I knew it was too late. The air pulsed, heavy, humming like the moment before a storm, and for a split second I thought of the smell of Mom's coffee in the mornings, the sound of her spoon clinking against her cup, the way she used to hum to herself while she waited for it to cool. Then the crackle came, sharp and alive, louder than the breath caught in my throat. The coffee spilled from my hand, crashing to the pavement in a splash of brown, the cup bouncing and rolling under the car. My knees buckled as the shock tore through me, fire racing up my spine, my teeth clenching so hard I tasted blood. My vision blurred, and I heard someone, maybe me, cry out, the sound swallowed by the buzzing in my ears. My body hit the ground, the cold cement tearing at the skin on my cheek, the smell of coffee mixing with the metallic scent of fear. Hands grabbed at my arms, plastic biting into my wrists as they pulled them behind me, the zip tie tightening with a jerk. "She's non-compliant. Domestic threat," someone muttered, and I felt the words sink deeper than the pain. As the world tilted, I saw my reflection in the store window, hair tangled, face pressed against the ground, eyes wide with a betrayal I couldn't name. A flash of movement caught my attention, another black SUV, different from the others, pulling up silently. The door opened and I saw Coulter's boots first, The familiar scuff on the side, the way his shoulders squared before he stepped forward. They didn't see him yet, but I did. My hand didn't drop fast enough, and I heard the crackle before I felt the pain. It was a sharp, bright agony, like the world itself had shattered inside my chest, tearing across every nerve until I couldn't tell where I ended, and the pain began. I didn't even hear the coffee cup hit the ground, only felt the burn of the hot liquid splattering against my wrist before the numbness swallowed it. My knees hit the concrete, hard enough that the sound echoed in my ears, a dull thud beneath the buzzing that drowned out everything else. I saw the receipt flutter down, twisting in the breeze before it landed in a dark puddle of coffee, the ink bleeding as it spread under my cheek. Someone was yelling, but the words made no sense, all jumbled together, one voice barking for my hands, another screaming to stay down, another telling me to roll over when I couldn't even breathe. I tried to move, to do something, but my arms wouldn't listen, trembling uncontrollably, fingers clawing at the pavement without purpose. A heavy boot stepped into my line of sight, blocking the morning sun, pressing its shadow across my face. I smelled the asphalt and coffee, the tang of fear on the back of my tongue, and I realized that I couldn't feel my legs. "Hands behind your back," someone shouted again, louder this time, like it was my fault that my body wouldn't work. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but all that came out was a sharp gasp, my breath catching in my throat, tears springing to my eyes as the cold plastic bit into my skin. They yanked my arms back, the zip tie cinching tight, pressing the edge of the cuff into the soft flesh of my wrist until I thought it might cut through. A woman across the street held her phone up, recording, her mouth slightly open. I saw the way her neighbor leaned in, whispering, "She must have done something." The words slicing deeper than the zip tie, sharper than the pain still pulsing through me. I wanted to scream that I hadn't done anything, that I was just holding coffee for my mother, that I was just tired and trying to get through the morning. But the words stuck, tangled with the taste of copper and the grit of the pavement. They pressed my face against the wet ground, cheeks scraping against tiny stones, coffee soaking into my hair. I could hear the footsteps around me, the shuffle of boots, the clink of metal, the distant sound of a radio crackling with codes I didn't understand. I tried to look up, to find a face that might give me a reason for why this was happening, but they wouldn't meet my eyes. One of them, a man with a square jaw and a badge that caught the light, glanced down, then looked away as he muttered, "Domestic threat." That's what I was now, a threat. Because I didn't move fast enough, because I was in the wrong place, holding the wrong cup of coffee, wearing the wrong tired expression on my face. The anger came slowly, crawling up from somewhere deep inside where I had learned to keep it hidden. I thought about Mom, alone in her chair, waiting for her coffee, probably humming to herself, trusting that I would walk back through the door like I always did. She didn't know that her signature on a piece of paper had taken everything from me. She didn't know that Melis had smiled that quiet, satisfied smile when she told me about the transfer, pretending it was what Mom wanted. I felt it then, the quiet rage that had nowhere to go, trapped in my chest as they kept me pinned to the ground. The taste of shame in my mouth was thicker than the blood from my bitten lip, the humiliation seeping into my skin as I heard the neighbors' whispers, felt their stares. Someone behind me was checking his camera, the red light blinking, the lens catching the morning light as if this was just another scene for them to file away. The officer with the badge, the one who called me a threat, avoided looking at me as he adjusted the body cam on his vest, his hands shaking slightly before he steadied them against his belt. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sounds blur together. The hushed voices, the shuffle of feet, the beep of a radio, the distant chirp of a bird that didn't care about the mess on the ground. I thought about how easy it was for everything to be taken, how quickly your life could be twisted into something unrecognizable, all because you hesitated. Then I felt the weight of another boot near my face, the shadows swallowing the weak sunlight, the quiet settling over the chaos. A voice, calm but firm, cut through the noise. "Lock it down. We got our suspect's handler." Handler. The word didn't make sense. I opened my eyes, blinking against the light, trying to see the face above the boots. But I couldn't understand what they meant, why they were saying it like it explained everything, why they acted like it was over. Until I saw her. Standing there, just beyond the line of officers, hair tied back, lips pressed into that same small, satisfied smile I had seen too many times. Watching me. Watching them. And for a moment, Everything stopped. I didn't even understand what they meant by handler until I saw her standing there. At first, it was just the shape of her, leaning against that shiny black car like she had every right to watch me on the ground. My cheek was still pressed against the concrete, wet from the coffee and the cold morning air, but my eyes found her, clear as day. Mayless. She had her arms folded, the corners of her lips lifted in that small, practiced smirk she used when she wanted you to know she was winning. She was sipping from a paper cup, careful, deliberate, the steam curling around her jaw as she tilted her head, like she was studying a painting she was proud of. It hit me like another shock, but this one went deeper than any taser ever could. I felt it in my bones, in the hollow part of my stomach where fear had already made a home. She was there, watching, not saying a word, and I understood she wanted me to see her. Around me, the noise of the scene kept rolling on. Officers' radios clicking, boots crunching over gravel, people whispering behind raised phones as they filmed me tied up on the pavement. A man I recognized from the laundromat said to someone, "Must have been serious," and I could hear the question in his voice. I wanted to scream that it was a mistake, that this wasn't who I was, that I wasn't dangerous. But my voice wouldn't come out. A radio crackled near my ear, words tumbling over each other. North Maple. Negative. South Maple confirmed. I blinked, the confusion crashing in, and something clicked. I wasn't supposed to be here. They weren't supposed to be here. They had the wrong address. The officer closest to me shifted, his hand tightening on the zip tie around my wrists. I tried to turn, to lift my head just enough to see his face, but he looked away, focusing on his radio, ignoring the way my hands were turning numb. I saw the way he swallowed, the way his jaw tightened, like he knew but couldn't admit it. I let my eyes slide back toward Mayless, still standing there, watching. Her eyes met mine for a breath, and she raised one eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing her face before she looked away, checking her phone as if she was waiting for a text about lunch plans. Like this was nothing. A flash of memory pushed through the fog in my mind. Her voice, soft and patient, telling me, "Trust me, Venna. I'll handle everything for Mom." The day she showed me those papers, telling me it was just a formality so we could get Mom's medication faster, so we could keep the bills under control, so I could keep working without worrying about what would happen if Mom fell again while I was at work. I'd signed, and she'd smiled, hugging me so tightly I almost believed her. Now, watching her sip coffee while I lay on the ground, wrists burning, cheeks stinging, I realized exactly what I had given her. Control, power, the keys to everything, while I was the fool working late shifts and bringing coffee home, too tired to notice the small lines of fine print, the way her eyes glittered when she said, "I'll take care of it." A breeze moved through the lot, rustling the yellow police tape tied to the bumper of a squad car, making it flap like a flag over my humiliation. I could hear the soft hum of voices in the crowd, a woman asking, "Did they get her?" and a man replying, "I think she was fighting back." Fighting back. If only they knew how much I had held in just to keep peace in our family. If only they knew how many times I had bitten my tongue to keep the image of a family together, to protect Mom from the truth of how Mayless really was. A shadow fell across my face, and I flinched, but it was only an officer moving closer, his boots stopping inches from my forehead. I couldn't see his face, but I heard him sigh, a tired sound, before he muttered, "Wrong house." It was so quiet, I almost thought I imagined it, but the silence that followed told me everyone else heard it too. No one moved to untie me. I felt my chest tighten, a sharp pain that had nothing to do with the taser and everything to do with the shame of lying there, powerless, while my life was crumbling. I turned my head, straining against the ties, and saw Mayless lift her phone. For a split second I hoped she was calling someone to stop this, to help me, but she didn't. She raised the phone, tilted it, and I saw the screen light up as she took a picture of me. Me, on the ground, dirt on my cheek, hair sticking to my face, eyes wide and helpless. She captured it, sealed it, her lips curling just enough for me to see her satisfaction, before she dropped the phone back into her bag. I wanted to scream, to curse her, to demand why she would do this to me, but all that came out was a small, broken sound, lost in the noise of the morning. And as I lay there, the coffee mixing with the dirt, the reflection in the puddle showed me her shoes first, polished black, expensive. Before I saw the tears streaming down my own face, tears I hadn't even realized were there until I saw them ripple across that reflection. I didn't even realize I was crying until I saw the puddle reflecting Melis's shoes. The tears felt cold against my skin, cutting through the grime, and coffee splattered across my cheek as I tried to sit up, pushing my back against the rough brick of the gas station wall. The zip ties bit into my wrists, plastic digging deeper with every small shift, reminding me that even my own movements had limits now. The morning had brightened, the sun creeping higher, catching on the shattered coffee cup shards scattered across the pavement. My eyes burned, but I forced them open, scanning the small crowd that had formed, phones held up like shields, recording me, recording this, recording the way a life could be dismantled in the space of a morning while others watched from the sidelines. Melis stood a few feet away, laughing quietly with a woman I didn't know, one hand gesturing casually as if she were sharing a joke over brunch instead of watching her sister tied up in the dirt. She didn't even glance at me, like I was a piece of old furniture set out on the curb, not worth a second look. That cut deeper than the plastic ties ever could. A gust of wind lifted the police tape, making it snap against the metal post, the sound sharp in the heavy quiet that had settled once the sirens stopped. I watched the older SWAT officer fumble with his radio, his voice low, strained, while the younger one, Daxon, I remembered now, shifted his weight, sweat sliding down from under his cap, leaving dark lines on the fabric. His hand moved up, a quick flick, and I saw him switch off the small camera clipped to his vest, his eyes darting toward Melis before he slipped the device into his pocket. That moment stuck with me, that tiny, nervous glance. It was the look of someone who knew they were wrong but was too deep in to back out, who chose to hide the truth rather than fix it. The silence afterward felt like it was pressing down on everyone, a shared, ugly knowledge that none of them would say out loud. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds around me fade into a low hum as I tried to steady my breathing. I thought of Mom, sitting alone at home, waiting for me to bring her breakfast, to help her sort out her medications, to just sit with her for a while so she wouldn't feel so alone in that small house that no longer even belonged to me. To us. Because I had trusted Melis. "Trust me, Venna. I'll handle everything for Mom." Her words crawled back into my head, and I felt the heat rise in my chest, anger mixing with regret. Regret blending into a cold, quiet rage that started in my stomach and crawled up until it settled behind my eyes, pushing the tears back. A low rumble cut through the air, a black SUV creeping into view, the engine deep and steady, demanding attention without a word. People stepped back instinctively as it rolled past the edge of the police tape, stopping with a deliberate slowness that made it clear whoever was inside didn't need to rush for anyone. I shifted, trying to ease the ache in my shoulders, but the movement only made the ties dig in harder, the plastic scraping against skin already raw. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from making a sound, from showing them the pain. I would not give them that, not anymore. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched the SUV, the tinted windows reflecting the bright morning light, turning the glass black, impenetrable. For a second, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was here to end this, to see me, to pull me out of this moment before it swallowed me whole. The door clicked open, a single sharp sound that made the crowd fall even quieter, and I watched as a black boot, polished to a shine, stepped out, planting itself firmly on the ground. The rest of the figure stayed hidden in the shadow of the door, a shape just out of reach, the kind of presence that made people hold their breath without even realizing it. I held my breath, waiting to see if it was him, and as the black boot settled on the pavement, I could feel the warmth of the engine heat drifting through the morning air, brushing against my skin, already sticky from sweat and fear. The door swung open wider, and Coulter stepped out, the crisp lines of his suit a sharp contrast to the dirt-streaked chaos around us. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't glance at the officers shifting nervously, didn't even look at Melis. His eyes found mine, and for one steady moment, the shaking in my chest quieted. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just held my gaze with the calm of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. Coulter's shoes crunched against the scattered gravel as he stepped forward, the morning sun glinting off the polished leather. The crowd around us seemed to hold its breath along with me, waiting. The SWAT members tightened their grips on their weapons, hands twitching near belts, but none of them spoke. In a voice that was quiet but somehow carried across the lot, Coulter said, "Check your warrant and your location." The words were like a match struck in a room filled with gas. The silence that followed was thick, pressing on everyone's shoulders as the officers exchanged glances, eyes darting to one another, to me, back to him. Radios crackled, one of the older officers stepping aside, murmuring into his mic, his eyes darting to Coulter and then down to the ground as if afraid to meet his gaze again. The air shifted, and I felt it as deeply as the ache in my wrists, a hum of tension, of fear wrapped in uniforms and badges, of the sudden realization that something was deeply wrong and everyone knew it. I shifted, trying to ease the strain in my back, but the ties dug in deeper, and a sharp sting shot up my arm. I clenched my teeth, fighting the noise that wanted to crawl up my throat. My eyes burned, and I blinked hard, tears sliding down my cheeks not from weakness, but from the violent release of fear that had built up, second by second, since the moment the taser cracked through the air. Across the lot, Melis shifted, her shoulders tensing, the coffee cup in her hand now gripped so tightly the lid buckled inward. She tried to keep that relaxed smirk on her face, but I saw the way her jaw tightened, how her gaze flicked to Coulter and then quickly away. She wasn't in control anymore, and we both knew it. Coulter stood there, hands in his pockets, not moving, just watching as the SWAT leader listened to his radio, his face draining of color. The words, North Maple and South Maple, hissed through the speaker, followed by a sharp silence that seemed to ring louder than any siren. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I had been holding, my shoulders dropping as the adrenaline began to drain, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion mixed with something else, something warm and trembling that I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The SWAT leader cleared his throat, glancing at his men, at Coulter, at me. But no one moved. No one stepped forward to cut the ties to help me up, to admit the mistake that now lay thick in the air between us. I thought about Mom's words she had spoken on a quiet afternoon when the house was still ours, when Melis was still pretending to care. He never raises his voice, Venna, but when he speaks, people listen. I had seen that truth in Coulter many times, but never had it meant as much as it did now, watching these men in tactical gear freeze under the weight of a single quiet command. I shifted again, the ties digging in, a reminder that I was still trapped, still humiliated, still aching on the dirty ground while strangers recorded and gossiped about the woman who must have done something wrong. My eyes flicked to Melis, who now looked everywhere but at me, her mask cracking with each passing second. Coulter finally turned his head toward the SWAT leader, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the thick summer air. "You need to fix this now before it gets worse." The leader's jaw tightened, his eyes dropping to the ground, then to me, then back to Coulter. I didn't know what worse meant, but the way they flinched told me I was about to find out. The air around Pete's Market felt heavier as the late morning heat pressed down, sweat sliding down my neck, clinging to the thin fabric of my shirt as I forced myself to breathe steadily. The yellow tape flapped in the breeze, and I heard the rip as officers began clearing bystanders further back, their firm voices lost under the low hum of engines and the whisper of onlookers who wouldn't look away. Phones were still lifted, red lights blinking, recording every humiliating second as I sat there with my wrists tied, dust clinging to the sweat on my skin. Coulter's shoes made no sound on the pavement as he walked forward, his presence as calm as ever. But I could feel the pulse of tension that rolled through the officers when he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a badge, holding it up with the kind of quiet confidence that made even the loudest man in the crowd fall silent. The SWAT leader's face changed, his eyes widening as he read the clearance level, lips pressing into a tight line. Around him, younger officers shifted, eyes darting to me, to Coulter, to the cameras that captured every uncomfortable moment. It was as if the ground itself shifted under them, the certainty they had carried cracking at the edges. One of them finally pulled out a knife, the blade flashing briefly in the sun before he bent down to slice through the plastic biting into my skin. It snapped, the sting in my wrists, sharp as blood, rushed back into my hands, but the officer didn't offer to help me up. His eyes avoided mine as he stepped back, and for a moment, the shame and rage tangled inside me so tightly I thought I might scream. I pushed myself up, legs shaking, knees throbbing, but I stood, brushing the dirt from my palms, chin lifting as I looked around at the people who had come to watch a spectacle. They didn't know me, but they knew what they had just witnessed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt on their faces, a question of whether they had believed the wrong story. Then her voice cut through the heat. Melis stepped forward, her hair perfectly in place, her lips painted that soft pink she liked to pretend made her approachable. She lifted her chin, looking around at the officers and the crowd before focusing on Coulter. "She's not well," she said loudly, forcing a tremble into her voice that didn't match the cold in her eyes. My sister has a history of emotional issues. She's off her medication again. She needs help, not— I could see the way her hand gripped her coffee cup, the knuckles white, the way her eyes kept flicking to the cameras before snapping back to me. She wanted them to believe it. She needed them to. Memories slammed into me. Nights sitting by Mom's bedside while Malice told the nurses I was exaggerating, telling Mom I was making things worse, twisting every worry, every anxiety I had into evidence that I was the problem. She had taken every small moment of fear I had ever trusted her with and used it to build the cage I was now clawing to escape. Coulter didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. That's enough. The words cut through Malice's performance like a blade, and she took a step back, blinking rapidly, her mouth opening and closing before she glanced around, looking for support in the crowd that was no longer nodding along. You don't understand, she tried again, her voice shrill. She's dangerous? I said that's enough, Coulter repeated, turning his full attention on her, and the force of it made even the officers shift on their feet. I realized then, standing there with dirt still on my palms, wrists burning, sweat drying on my skin, that Malice wasn't just cruel. She was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I opened my mouth. Afraid that the lies she had carefully spun would unravel the moment I spoke the truth. She turned on the waterworks, big tears rolling down her cheeks as she lifted her hands dramatically. She's my sister. I love her, but you don't know what she's capable of. Cut the performance, I said, my voice low but clear, and it startled her enough that the tears paused, eyes widening as she stared at me. The cameras caught that moment, the slip in her mask, and the crowd knew it. Coulter stepped closer to me, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear it, but I knew the cameras would pick up every word. Are you ready to tell them the truth now? I opened my mouth, but the truth I had held for so long caught in my throat, sitting there like a stone I couldn't swallow or spit out. The heat of the midday sun was pressing against my back, warming the brick wall I leaned on, making the sweat under my collar feel like needles. I looked at Malice, who stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, that same smug tilt to her chin she used to give me when we were kids, whispering to Mom that I was acting out when I had simply asked for another blanket. That look now was sharpened by fear, though she tried to hide it, her eyes darting from the SWAT officers to the phones recording to Coulter standing beside me. People were watching, neighbors who used to nod at me when I carried groceries for Mom, parents from the school carpool line. A few strangers with coffee cups paused halfway to their lips. The silence was thicker than the Texas heat. I forced a breath, my lungs shaking, and I found my voice, low and trembling, but it came out anyway. You all should know what she did, I said, looking around at the faces staring back at me. My sister here convinced my mother to sign over everything while she was sick. While I was working double shifts, trying to keep us afloat, Malice was moving money, signing papers, telling everyone I was unwell. Malice's lips parted, the confident smirk slipping for a moment before she caught it, replacing it with a laugh that didn't match the tightness in her jaw. Venna, please, she said, her tone the fake sweet one she'd used on Mom's hospice nurse. You know how you get when you skip your medication. I took a step forward, shaking, but stronger than I had been in years. I don't take medication, Malice. You told everyone I did, that I was unstable, so you could take what you wanted without a fight. Around us, I could hear the shifting of feet, whispers starting, the ripple of discomfort as the crowd realized this wasn't the scene they'd expected. Coulter stood at my side, silent, but I felt his steady presence grounding me. Malice's mask cracked again, her eyes narrowing. She pulled her phone from her pocket with a sharp flick of her wrist, her thumb flying across the screen. You all want to see proof? She shouted, her voice rising above the quiet. She's a danger to herself and everyone else. She held up the screen, flashing what looked like a medical document with my name on it, the words unstable, non-compliant, highlighted in bold. A gasp rippled through the onlookers, but I could see Coulter's jaw tighten, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in. That's enough, Coulter said, his voice calm, controlled, but it silenced the murmurs. He looked at me, meeting my eyes, and I saw the question there, the silent request for permission. My hands were trembling so badly that I had to curl them into fists to stop them. My mother's face flashed before me, the last time she had squeezed my hand, whispering, "Don't let her take everything." I thought of how Malice had stood at the funeral, crying those dry tears, telling people I was too fragile to handle the paperwork. I nodded, a single movement, and Coulter reached into his pocket, pulling out a small speaker, pressing play. My mother's voice came through, thin but clear, the strain in it cutting sharper than any accusation. "Venna, I'm sorry. I signed the papers because she wouldn't leave me alone. She said you'd never know, that you didn't care. I know you do. I'm so sorry." Milas's face drained of color, the hand holding her phone dropping slightly as the words settled over the crowd. People shifted, eyes moving from her to me, to the SWAT officers who suddenly looked like they wished they were anywhere else. "You don't understand," Malis screamed, lunging forward, her hand reaching for the speaker. "You don't know what she's capable of." The officers moved instinctively, stepping between us, hands going up to block her as she reached, her face twisted with anger and fear. And I stood there, no longer the one trembling, as the chaos swirled around Malis instead. Her voice cracked as she screamed for someone, anyone, to believe her, but the crowd that had once looked at me with suspicion now stepped back from her, their eyes hard and unblinking. The SWAT officers who had zip-tied my wrists just hours earlier moved with a calm efficiency I hadn't seen before. They surrounded Malis, hands on her arms, not roughly but firmly enough that her struggles looked small and frantic, like a child throwing a tantrum in public. Her shrill cries cut through the thick afternoon air, a sharp, desperate sound that made a few people flinch. "You've ruined everything!" she spat, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her hair sticking to the sweat on her forehead. I stepped forward, my legs still sore from the way I had fallen, but they held steady. "No, Malis," I said, my voice quiet but clear enough for the small crowd to hear. "You did." She tried to wrench away from the officers, her eyes wild. "She's lying! She's always been unstable! Ask anyone!" Her gaze darted to the bystanders, looking for someone, anyone, to agree with her. No one spoke up. A woman I recognized from the pharmacy, someone who had once patted Malis's shoulder while looking at me with pity, lowered her eyes. A man who had mowed Mom's lawn last summer shook his head slowly, folding his arms across his chest. Coulter stepped beside me, close enough that I felt his presence, but he didn't touch me. He didn't need to. I drew in a slow breath, the warm air heavy with a scent of asphalt and something like freedom. An officer near Malis held up a small radio, nodding to his partner. "She'll be coming with us for questioning. Fraud, elder abuse, let's keep it quiet," he said, but the words weren't quiet enough. They fell into the silence, rippling across the crowd like a dropped stone in water. Malis's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words, the right lie, to pull herself out of this. But there was nothing left for her to grab onto. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice dropping low, venomous. "You think you're better than me, after everything you've done?" I didn't flinch. "No, I don't think I'm better, but I know I'm free." As they led her toward the SWAT SUV, her feet dragging against the ground, I saw the way people were looking at me now. Some offered small, tight nods of respect. Others looked away, ashamed they had once believed her stories about me. A few whispered apologies I barely heard, and I didn't need to. I wasn't here for them. The hum of radios and the soft conversations of officers faded as I stood there, letting the moment sink into my bones. The fear that had wrapped around my ribs for as long as I could remember loosened, falling away piece by piece. A neighbor, the one who often sat on her porch with a small dog in her lap, walked over, holding out a cup of coffee. It was hot, the steam curling into the warm afternoon air. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that said more than words could. "Drink it while it's warm, sweetheart," she said, her voice sounding so much like Mom's that it made my throat tighten. I took the cup, letting the warmth seep into my hands, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I sipped, the bitterness and heat anchoring me to the present, to the moment I had waited so long to stand in. Coulter leaned in, his voice low so only I could hear. "Are you ready to go home?" I didn't answer immediately. I let my gaze wander over the parking lot, now clearing out as people slowly returned to their cars, conversations hushed, eyes glancing back at me. I watched the SWAT SUVs pull away, Milas's face visible for just a second in the back window, her eyes wide, her mouth still moving, but no sound reaching me. I looked at the horizon, the sun glinting off the tops of cars and the roof of the gas station, and I realized for the first time that I could define what home meant for myself. It wasn't about a house or who claimed the biggest room. It wasn't about who controlled the checkbook or whispered in neighbors' ears. It was the air in my lungs, the steadiness in my step, the way I could stand in the quiet and know I was exactly where I was meant to be. Coulter drove us back through the slow, pulsing afternoon traffic of Austin, the city alive but gentle, like it was giving me space to breathe. Neither of us spoke much, the radio playing low, a country station crackling over the speakers. My body still ached, the burns on my skin reminding me of what I'd just survived, but I didn't shrink from the pain. It was proof that I'd lived through it. When we turned down the familiar street, the one lined with oaks that shaded the cracked sidewalks, my chest tightened. The house came into view, a simple brick place, the paint peeling on the porch railing, the garden Mom loved now overrun with weeds. But the wind chimes she had hung by the front door were still there, singing softly as the breeze moved through. We parked and I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes. I climbed the steps slowly, pausing when the porch creaked, its groan welcoming me back. My hand hovered over the doorknob, remembering how many times I had carried bags of groceries, prescriptions, and tired hopes through this door. I had always arrived with the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Today I carried nothing but my own breath and the calm that had finally settled into my bones. Coulter stayed back, leaning against the railing, giving me space. I opened the door, the familiar scent of the house washing over me, a mix of old wood, coffee, and the faintest trace of Mom's lavender lotion that had seeped into the walls over the years. The kitchen was exactly as we had left it. The coffee pot was still on the counter, the mug beside it empty, waiting. I picked it up, turning it in my hands, hearing Mom's voice in my memory. "Drink it while it's warm, sweetheart." I could almost see her sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around her own mug, her eyes tired but soft when she looked at me. I set the mug down and opened the window, letting in the fresh air and the sounds of cicadas buzzing as the sun began its slow descent. The breeze lifted the curtains, and for a moment it felt like the house was exhaling, letting go of all it had held inside. On the small TV in the living room, the news was playing. I saw Melis's face, pale and drawn, as the reporter listed the charges against her: fraud, elder abuse, the investigation into the assets she had moved while our mother was sick. I didn't smile. Justice was necessary, but it wasn't a celebration. It was a clearing of the fog, a way forward. I turned the TV off, letting the quiet settle. I walked through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the doorway where Mom had measured our heights with a pencil. The memories came, but they didn't hurt the way they used to. They were gentle now, reminders of what was good, even in the hard times. Standing in the doorway of my old room, I felt a promise forming in my chest. I would rebuild this home, not because I owed it to anyone, but because I wanted to. I would pull the weeds from the garden, fix the railing on the porch, let the wind chimes sing without fear that someone would tell me I was wrong for how I loved this place. I returned to the kitchen and placed Mom's framed photo on the counter next to the coffee pot. Her smile in the picture was soft, knowing. I picked up the mug again, filling it with water from the tap, and took a sip, the warmth grounding me. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor. I stepped onto the porch, the wood warm under my feet, the air filled with the song of the cicadas and the soft ringing of the chimes. Coulter stood up, his eyes meeting mine, but he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. I looked out at the street, the sky painted in gold and soft pinks, the day ending in a quiet promise of tomorrow. I lifted the mug to my lips, took a final sip, and whispered into the breeze that carried my words away. "Mom, I'm home."